All right, here we go. Welcome to Destination the Show, episode 17. Uh Back as always with Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, how are you doing?
I'm great.
You don't
Uh,
sound great.
is that how do I look?
you,
Uh,
you look great, but you don't sound great.
well, yeah, I mean it's that time of the year where things just start to pile up, and I do have a question aside from how are you doing, but also what are you wearing there,
I'm
Mr. Cameron?
wearing I'm wearing a Christmas sweater, an Olaf themed
There it
Christmas
is.
sweater. I told you I'm a
You,
holiday guy.
you
So
like warm hugs?
I do.
Perfect.
Not from you, but
Virtually would
almost
be the best I can do.
almost exclusively anybody else. Yes.
Fair.
Um But I'm excited, man. So last week we had Tom Froming on, an awesome conversation digging into the Twins minor league system. Got a ton of great feedback. Thank you guys for supporting that episode. So we're going to do it again, and we have another guest lined up for you guys tonight. But this time we're going to be talking Cubs. So delighted to introduce to the show. Let me make sure I get this right. The new managing editor of Twins Daily, Brewer Fanatic, and most importantly in this conversation, Northside Baseball, Matt Trueblood. Matt, how are you doing?
Doing great. It really was not important what title you said though, because I made it up. I just got to decide, so it's completely not real.
Right on. Can you change it at any point?
Yeah, I'm thinking of going back and lobbying John to let me make it like Supreme Overlord, something like that. But
There you go.
baby steps.
There you
I
go.
think just maybe add some letters at the end, because if you have letters at the end of your title or name, you're definitely sound more important, right?
Yeah, but not. I don't want to stick with. I don't want to be unoriginal. Like PhD Esquire. That stuff's boring. I got to come up with something on my own.
Yeah,
So
I'm looking forward to that.
it's a creative process.
I dig it. Matt, so we had Tom Froming on last week, and we started the show with a game of Last Time I Saw You. And in his case, that was last time I saw him was Twins breaking the playoff curse. But the last time I saw you, we were running in a 200-mile relay race together from the Twin Cities to Duluth. Boy, what a
Yeah,
time that was.
it was fantastic. It was. Those are relatively recent discovery for me, and I dragged you along, and I know it was the first time you'd done something like it, but it's a really good time, man. All the way from, I guess this year it was St. Paul to Duluth and overnight and everything. So it was a blast.
Jeremy, man, you're on deck for 2024. What do you say?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna pass. Can we play first time I saw you? Because the first time I saw Matt, do you remember when this was, Matt? You
Had to
probably
be at one
don't.
of the winter meltdowns, right?
No, it was at like an in season thing at
Oh,
Target
sure.
Field.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at one point I turned to Bonus, I said, "Who's the hammered dude?" And he's like, "That's Matt Trueblood." And I'm like, "That's Matt Trueblood."
Yeah.
So yeah, last time I think was probably at a meltdown, but first time was definitely it was a fun day at Target Field. I think was maybe somebody was celebrity bartending or something, and that's why we were there. But good times.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Bonus is a really bad influence on me. So I went ahead and made him my boss, and I figure that'll work out really well.
Okay, so let's talk about that, Matt, because you recently moved into a new role. I think we actually got the title right, jokes aside, right? Managing editor of 3 sites. I think I could be wrong, so you're going to correct me if I am. That this is your first like full-time baseball writing, editing gig. So, for folks who are listening to this who might be unfamiliar with you and your work and your kind of path into the baseball industry, tell us a little bit about that and how you kind of got where you are today and some of the pit stops along the way for you.
Sure. So, I mean, I went to school for journalism at Loyola Chicago, and this is the particular place I've ended up will sound perfect if you sort of get the map of my life story. I was born in Illinois, but moved to Wisconsin and grew up there in Northeast Wisconsin in Appleton, where the high A affiliate of the Brewers is.
Mm-hmm.
Went to school in Chicago, met my wife, who is from Minnesota, and we moved out here in 2011. Then, for all kinds of reasons, I was not working primarily in journalism for all of that time since. But it was for, I don't know, 9 or 10 of those years, baseball writing has been a side hustle I've been doing. Baseball Prospectus a lot and a bunch of other places. Kind of got hooked in with Twins Daily in 2019. And but I also sort of stepped away and thought I was moving on from writing altogether in 2021, somewhere, late stage pandemic, right? And then just sort of got the itch and started tapping out stuff on a Substack again. And Bonus reached out and talked to me about first doing some caretaker stuff for the caretaker section of Twins Daily. And then we sort of expanded from there, and I took over Brewer Fanatic, and we started, or sort of bought up and rehabilitated Northside Baseball in the spring. And that led to where we are now. So it's been a long time doing this strictly at night and on weekends and when I'm supposed to be doing my day job. But now we're sort of landed in, I hope, a perfect spot. We'll see. Only a few weeks in so far.
Yeah, man, that's awesome to hear. And speaking of this little kind of trifecta of teams that you're responsible for producing content on, what's the off season been like for you? Because you're in this new role, and all things considered, it has been incredibly slow overall. But I would argue that those three teams have had particularly boring off seasons so far. A little bit of frustration probably in all three of those fan bases. What's it been like for you to kind of try and keep the content getting generated?
That hasn't been as big a problem as I thought it might be. And maybe, again, I have only been spinning this particular set of plates all at once for 3-4 weeks. So I am maybe grateful that it hasn't been this torrent of stuff where I might not be able to keep up. More, I've been able to get my feet under me, get to know some of the writers that I'm working with and stuff. But for the fan bases, it's been really hard. What was it? A few days ago, Jeff Passan tweeted a list of here's what every team has spent in free agency this year. And if you add it up, the Brewers, the Cubs, and the Twins, it was 2 zeros and a $10.2 million. And that's obviously that's aggravating to three fan bases of teams who all expect to contend next year.
Yep.
And, two of them are dealing with TV money uncertainty, and maybe the payroll is going to shrink. Maybe it's going to hold static when they'd like it to expand. The Brewers are at this weird crossroads with some of their best players on the cusp of free agency. But even those trades, which a certain segment of the Brewers fan base wants those trades to happen just so they can sort of move forward, have some clarity. And the Cubs have just done nothing at all. It's been this big building bubble of tension, and I'm just hoping one way or another something breaks it for each fan base soon.
For sure. It's been boring, man. It's been a struggle. But you know what? There's always good content to dig into on the minor league side of things, and that's what we're excited to do today. Cubs and Brewers certainly have arguments for some of the most interesting farm systems, I think, in all of baseball. So want to start there, and we're just going to dig in some questions, man. And me and Jeremy will kind of alternate back and forth here. But want to start high level because our podcast is weird, right? We kind of dabble in three teams and three orgs. And so there's a subsection of people going to be listening to this that maybe aren't super in the weeds on the Cub system. So I would love, Matt, to start off to get your take on like what's the overall state of the system, both like within the context of the NL Central and kind of baseball as a whole. What are your thoughts?
It's the deepest in the NL Central for sure. and one of the deepest in baseball, which is kind of cool. I think we're used to, specifically, Cubs fans are used to a couple of guys getting hyped. Either it's just because the media machine needs someone to hype, or the system really tended to get top heavy. That always happened before Theo Epstein came along. He was supposed to sort of fix that, but there were rules changes for a lot of reasons that didn't really happen during the Epstein-Hoyer regime. Now we are seeing a level of depth and just constant refreshing of talent under Jed Hoyer that has been really rare in recent Cubs history. I think there are people who will tell you this is one of the 2 or 3 best farm systems in the game. I'm lower on it than that. But if you've got it anywhere outside the top 7 or 8, I think you're probably nuts. There's a lot of really interesting players, some high ceilings, a lot of high floors, and just a lot of really interesting pieces, again, at each level too, from AAA down to the complex league. And so I think there's probably not a farm system on balance that I would rather have in the NL Central. Although it's sort of apples and oranges with, for instance, them or the Brewers, them or the Pirates. It's just very different because they're all about depth, and those systems have higher highs, bigger stars at the top.
And I think that's a conversation Jamie and I have had a number of times, because the Cubs and the Brewers, and really I think the Reds as well, all seem to have that high level talent. And I guess you kind of answered that next question. You said you'd rather have the Cubs than the Brewers. I think that's what Jamie said too, and I said the opposite.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's no player, obviously. There is not a player, and if you just look at like a top 100 overall list, you're going to see Pete Crow-Armstrong at a spot that doesn't feel that different than Jackson Chourio. They are not the same. They are not the same level of prospect, and that has to come in and be taken into account. But when you get beyond sort of Chourio is this special, super, and the Brewers have captured his value in this unique way too, right, with the long-term deal. But when you get beyond that, it's not just that the Cubs system is deeper. I feel like it's a lot deeper. Having been in the weeds with the Brewers system throughout the year, I'm not saying they don't have interesting guys down into the, into the lower levels. You can get 20, 25 names deep in the Brewers system and still say, this has a chance to be a future big leaguer. I think the Cubs have a lot more pieces who have a chance to be average or better big leaguers, or, they might go 50 deep with guys that I think can play a role in the majors somehow. Now, can the Cubs actually leverage that and capture that value with Jed Hoyer clinging tightly to his dear prospects like there is security blankets? I don't know. But I would rather have what he has to work with than what Matt Arnold has to work with at this moment.
Yeah, I think that goes back a little bit, Jeremy, too, to our constant debate of like, do you value ceiling, right? And like, I think about the Cubs as an organization when I'm considering that question. And I think with a bigger market, bigger budget team, I want more lottery tickets. And so that's why I went with the Cubs. But I do 100% agree on Chourio. Chourio is like a special case, although I know both of us tend to lean more towards kind of upside than floor. And I think a lot of the Brewers' depth is going to kind of depend on how their 2023 draft class shakes out, that I know we have been very effusive and excited about on this show. So quick sidebar question for you, Matt, because producer Theo Bowen in the chat, is this the strongest you remember the Cubs system being? Is it deeper now than it was in 2014?
Definitely deeper. Now, again, it's that impact versus depth conversation or debate. I don't think there's a Chris Bryant or even an Addison Russell or there might be guys like Javier Baez and Jorge Soler in this system, but there's not that really special top of the scale person or people in this other than maybe Crow-Armstrong and Cade Horton. But it's definitely deeper than that group was, because I think I just think, first of all, this is a longer conversation. We don't have to get all the way into it, but you can think of the hard draft bonus pool, that system. You can sort of think of it as the Theo Epstein rules. Those came in the new CBA in 2011. And a lot of it was to address the fact that Theo Epstein had just broken the uncapped draft bonus system. He was trading for players just to offer them arbitration on the way out the door and collect compensatory picks. He was slinging money around like crazy, like no other big market team, certainly in the entire country. He was also a little ahead of the curve technologically. The Red Sox got a hold of Mookie Betts because they were doing neuro scouting on him before anyone else was doing that stuff. So Theo had this way of doing things that got a little broken, and he had to sort of rebuild his idea of how do I beat the system scouting and development wise after new rules came in 2012. Jed Hoyer hasn't had to do that. And so what he's established over the last few years is a system and a set of personnel that he's really comfortable with in scouting and player development. They've made good trades, and there's just been a more fluid process of building up depth to the point that, I think they're more stocked to every level that the minors has than they were even 8 or 9 years ago. And that's going to continue with another strong international class coming up in January.
For sure. So let me ask you this then, because you alluded to the cumulative anxiety of Twins, Brewers, and Cubs fans this offseason, right? With just this kind of slow malaise of an offseason for some of those teams. That's kind of fueled by TV deal uncertainty, just a slow moving market in general. For you, as someone who's really locked in and focused on the Cubs, from my outsider perspective take on Cubs Twitter, which maybe isn't the most sensible entry point, right? There's a lot of frustration. There was optimism about Shohei, and there seems to be this need to secure a big ticket free agent. Does the depth that you spoke about in the Cubs system kind of allay the need to do that for you? Does it change that thought process for you with just how many potential solid to impact major league prospects they have kind of in the mid to upper levels of the minors?
Yeah, it should do kind of all of that, because having so many useful and interesting guys should give Hoyer a lot of confidence and sort of capital to go make a big trade, or say, I got a bunch of guys who can come in and sort of be the supporting cast, and they're all going to do it on the cheap. That's the nature of, homegrown role players and back end starters and all of that. So that allows me to go out and spend at the top of the market and make that slightly irrational bid to lock up a superstar. That doesn't seem to be within Jed Hoyer's personality. So he's not leveraging that advantage yet. There's more than one way to do that. He could, instead of thinking that way, he could say, I trust my player development staff more so than in the past to get these guys not over the hump of being big leaguers, but to turn them into stars, to turn a Matt Shaw into a star third baseman, to, get the most out of Pete Crow-Armstrong so that he is a star, a guy who's hitting 20 homers and stealing 30 bases and playing that elite defense instead of just sort of a Kevin Kiermaier type. If he believes he can just convert those players into their 75th or 80th percentile projection, then you don't really need to make the big splurge and over sort of leverage yourself for the long term in order to add a star now. But that's going to beget that frustration that you're talking about. Like Cubs Twitter is losing it, and it's justifiable because he hasn't yet proved to the fan base that that's going to work. It hasn't worked in the recent past when they've tried to do the same thing. And there's a mistrust of ownership and whether they're really giving him the resources to spend. whether he's being aggressive enough in expending them. So the only way to allay any of that is to go out and win, which they can do without, using the farm system as an excuse to spend big. But that would be the most traditional and sort of direct way to make use of this farm system. And so far, they're not showing an interest in it.
So when we talked to Tom last week about the twin system not obviously as good as the Brewers, the Cubs, but trying to kind of balance that fact with the idea that the Twins have graduated a lot of prospects that have already become useful major leaguers at a younger age. Royce Lewis, Eddie Julian, Matt Wallner coming in, and then in the staff with Bailey Ober and Joe Ryan. So thinking about the Cubs and what you've said about the depth of their system, how does that work when you add in their already existing major league talent? I mean, is it the same wave that's going to be able to contribute, or is this like the next wave? How does their current minor league depth work with their current major league talent?
Yeah, I love that conversation last week because I agree. It's just ranking farm systems is kind of useless. You do have to take into account what young talent the team has, what maybe not even that young, but sort of locked in for the long-term talent the team has. A Correa and a Buxton, it doesn't matter that they're 30 instead of 25, they're around for the long term. So you think about how the farm system fills in and gets around that. With the Cubs, they've begun to do the same thing. For the first couple of years post-Epstein, when it was Hoyer slogging through the rebuild, trading away the championship core of 2016, they really didn't have a long-term identity, anybody to sort of build around, or at least they weren't sure that they did. Mm-hmm. Now they are. They signed extensions with Ian Happ and Nico Horner in the spring. Those guys are well beyond prospect status, but they're still young or prime-aged, and they're going to be around for at least a few years. Dansby Swanson, Seiya Suzuki, Justin Steele, none of these guys are going away in a couple of seasons. Plus, and sort of unexpectedly, without Christopher Morel ever being a top prospect, he's now sort of established himself as he's either going to be moderately valuable trade bait or a really good bat to have around and sort of an oddly versatile player to move around your lineup. Those things are there. They probably don't have as much in the way of young and especially cost-controlled talent as the Twins do, or even as the Brewers do. But they do have a certain number of sort of cornerstones in place, something that you can build out and build around, and that sort of channels your efforts now. You can say, these are the holes that I have to fill. They're more clear. It's more clear what they need and what they don't need. And so that makes it easier to say, is this piece who's coming up through the system someone I need or someone I can afford to trade for what I do need? That kind of thing.
Makes sense. Makes good sense to me. So this is what I'm excited about, Matt. We want to start to dig in on some individual guys. I feel like we picked out some favorites here. So I guess I'll go first. So Jeremy can talk about his precious pitchers. I want to start with PCA just because he's at the top of the system. We were so jazzed because we started the show kind of on the tail end of last season, right in the middle of the Cubs kind of brutal end of season capitulation. And we were so jazzed about PCA getting called up. Like maybe he could be a spark. Maybe he'll give some energy or a different look. And I think he finished with something like 13 plate appearances for the time he was up. Was that puzzling to you given how the Cubs were playing at the time? And then what are your expectations for him for how he fits into the plan for 2024?
I think if you need an explanation for why the Cubs were so aggressive when Craig Counsell became a free agent, and why, even though they didn't initially fire David Ross, they were open to replacing him with that move. you don't have to look a lot further than PCA. And the fact that when they called him up, he was asked, and he has a regular radio hit that happened to coincide with the day PCA was called up, and they asked him about it. Everyone's excited about this. The whole fan base, the whole organization, certainly the hosts who were talking to him, and his answer was, "I'm not developing players right now. I'm trying to win." You're not wrong, Dave, but it's your job as the manager to do both. It was such a crystallizing moment of he doesn't get that you have to juggle. You have to spin plates when you're a big league manager. Craig Counsell's good at that, and that's why they brought him in. PCA has a lot of work left to do. His raw numbers sort of hid that, especially in the upper minors this particular season. But there's a lot of swing and miss there. His swing is geared toward lifting the ball in the air to the pull field, which is good. It gets him to his power relatively easily, but also it's kind of grooved. You can miss his bat with just a fastball that's located well up in the zone. He's going to have to learn to lay off of that unless and until he can tweak his swing so that it's not true anymore. He's going to have to re-engineer his approach just around, I got to be a little more patient. I got to know what I can and can't hit. I got to, that has to go a little more slowly than he's tried to make his development go, and that the organization has let it go over the last year or so. But he's ready. He's so ready defensively and so valuable defensively that I think even if he spends a week or two in Iowa to open the season, he's basically your center fielder. And I think this is where I maybe am a hair behind other people on him, is that a lot of folks see him as a future top of the order hitter, a guy who will eventually, if it's a 350 OBP, that's fine. It comes with some punch. It comes with a lot of speed, and you just bat him lead off and stick him in center and forget about it. I think short term, at least, and maybe even medium term, you want him batting somewhere from 6th to 9th in the order. You can let him leverage that power a little, get on base when he can. You can use your legs really well at the bottom of the order, but I don't think they're going to be able to rely on his bat in the short term, but they do need to get his glove to the majors and delivering the value that it holds for them in the short term. And then you can figure out the lineup by adding great hitters at first base and DH. PCA is an impact player right now, just with that glove. He showed it right away, even in what was a really tough sample in September. You got to get that into the big leagues and doing its thing for you fast. And I think they will.
It's amazing how you could take that response and then rewind time until Byron Buxton was going to come into the major leagues and say those exact same things.
Yeah.
About a guy that had those same questions, those same strengths. And even still, what are we, 7-8 years later? And it's still this roller coaster that we ride where we see, is he an MVP caliber player? And is he worth jogging out there? And so it was fun to listen, because I'm like, yeah, we lived that as Twins fans for a long time. But enough about the non-pitchers. Let's talk about Cade Horton. And before I let you talk, the questions I have are, how surprised were you when his name was called as a kind of a guy that was a third baseman, didn't pitch full time in college, had this wonderful run to the College World Series, and then just turns around and dominates. And his first year, I'm just looking at his stats and kind of chuckling, because he makes 4 starts at low A and is dominant, and then moves up to high A and makes 11 starts and is dominant, and then moves up to double A and makes 6 starts and is just plain silly. So as we look at this year, what are your expectations for 2024? And how high is this ceiling for Cade Horton?
Yeah. Those are the right questions. I love this. It is something that happens plenty often when you've been on the internet just shouting out opinions for as long as I have. I was so wrong about Cade Horton. wildly, hilariously, aggressively wrong. I mean, and I stuck with it for a long time, well into this season, because, and Jamie said it before, Cade Horton, if you take a college pitcher 7th overall, I don't care what his backstory is, he'd better dominate low A. He'd better, frankly, dominate high A. And he did. But it wasn't just that he went out and did that. It was how he did it, too. And basically added a pitch at each step that he went up the ladder, to the point where now he's a 4-pitch dude with all of them able to miss bats and land in the strike zone. I was very aggressively against taking him 7th overall. They had Cam Collier on the board. I was like, you're nuts. I don't know what you're thinking about. We'll get to what else they got, I'm sure, from Jeremy. By taking Horton instead of Collier, they had access to another talent in that same class. So that was doubling the benefit. But clearly what they saw and then what they've been able to pull out of him is super real. What are my expectations for him? I mean, I think you're going to see him at Wrigley Field in 2024. I think if he stays healthy, the guy he reminds me of, and he's a little more compact, a little more explosive than this guy, but obviously it's a lofty comp. It's a lot of Zach Gallen. The same 4 pitches, sort of similar arm slot and delivery. Gallen is up to 5 pitches now, and I think Horton could add a cut or 2 if he needed to eventually. But everything works. Everything, again, he can fill up the strike zone. He can miss bats with it. He's got the athleticism. He's got the attitude. And I'm happy to be that wrong about a prospect. It's the wrongest I've been about one in years.
And the best part is that you threw a player comp in there too, because Jamie loves player comps.
Do I like player comps? No. So as usual, you've misrepresented my thoughts and ideas, which is what you strive to do on this show. I like player comps when they're backed up by reason and specific description of why the comp is being made, which Matt clearly did, right? I'm not it's a great comp. I mean, that is interesting though, Matt, because I mean, we will come back to that draft class as you like alluded to already, but the Cubs had a ton of interesting options on the board. It turned out in that spot they went for Horton, Brooks Lee, Kevin Parada, Cam Collier all went after that point. I mean, that was a lot of high caliber talent available to them to select, but it's just been a slam dunk, man. Okay, before we circle back to that draft class, I'm gonna keep Jeremy waiting a little bit more on his guy. I really want to ask you a little bit about the group that's underneath PCA. And something we do probably too much on this show is anytime a new list comes out, we love digging into it and seeing where they put specific guys, right? And so we've talked about Cade Horton, Owen Casey, Alcantara, Shaw, Ballesteros, like as this group underneath that. In terms of impact, I think with the exception of Horton, they feel like somewhat interchangeable, and there's like a nice level of like diversity in that group of prospects. Do you if we go past PCA and Horton, do you have a clear kind of order or tiers that you see that next group in, or do you kind of cluster them together as a kind of next tier down group, or how do you think about that kind of 3 through 7, 8, 9 range in the Cubs system?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. They're sort of in a general tier. I would lump Ben Brown into the back end of that tier too. Although it's weird because I do think there's a decent chance he ends up making a quick move to the bullpen and just stays there. But if he does, I think it's like one of the better closers in baseball for several years, kind of a move. But I think that group does belong as a tier. And yet I've got, I think, some clear preferences within it. Like, I think people are underrating Kevin Alcantara a little bit.
Yes.
We know what the upside is. The tools scream themselves at you when you just watch a clip on video. This big, long, lanky dude with a quick bat. It can be a lot of power. It can be a lot of speed, whatever. I think it's easy to see that and see the potential for strikeout issues and, whatever comes with being sort of overlong for a baseball player. But his floor is much higher than I think you're automatically tempted to make it in your head, just because he's a much better defender than I think people realize. If it wasn't for PCA, you would be penciling Alcantara in as a center fielder of the future. Runs really well. And also, this is something I love in a hitter. It's not that there are advantages to a grooved swing, right? Like Alexander Canario, further down the ladder in this system, has this great grooved swing. He's not going to miss your mistake. When you make a mistake, it's going to go 420 feet. Bye. Sorry. See ya. If you don't make a mistake, you can get him out pretty darn consistently. That's the trade-off he's made. Alcantara isn't going to as consistently obliterate the ball, but for a dude with really long levers, he can manipulate the barrel impressively. The strikeout rate stays low because he can move his hands and still put a decent part of the bat on the ball and find the right field corner with it, that kind of thing. I just think his floor is a lot higher than people realize, given how high the ceiling is too. So he's not like a far and away 3 for me, but I line him up a little out in front of the others. But I agree that whole tier can just sort of be lumped together without losing a whole lot, because they all, in very different ways, end up in the same value strata.
Yeah, for sure. I agree on that. Alcantara 100%. Like we'll come back to some AFL performances and such later, but he was my interesting Cubs pick there, which is probably low hanging fruit, but I 100% agree. Like he looks like he should be long to the ball, and he's just really, really not. All right, Jeremy, go ahead and ask about your next guy.
So back to the important part, the part that wins championships. And I don't actually love pitchers that much. I mean, it's worked out that way with the Cubs.
You love this guy though.
Yeah, well, I mean,
you love this guy coming out, no? If we're thinking about the same guy.
So coming into the 2022 draft and where the Twins kind of sat, being more of the Twins fan, a guy that was very intriguing to me was Jackson Ferris, because in my opinion, the top lefty in that group of prep pitchers, and the way the Cubs manipulate their pool, they get Horton and then they get Ferris, and the MLB write-up. And I only bring this up because like I said, comps, right? When they end the write-up on Ferris by saying he physically resembles Blake Snell at the same age, but with superior stuff and mechanics. So basically what they're writing is Jackson Ferris is going to win all the Cy Youngs, right? And be a Hall of Famer. So tell me that that's not going to happen, because that's where I'm just assuming is going to happen.
I think what is the one thing that every pitcher needs most especially what separates a guy who's going to shred in the minor leagues from a big league successful starter is fastball command. And Ferris has got a ways to go on that. But of course he does. He was 19 this year.
Right.
I thought it was wonderfully aggressive of them to put him in full season ball right away in his first year after being a prep prospect. You never used to see that. I mean, used to 30, 40 years ago, all the time, that was the plan. And then for a long time, nobody did it. And now with the contraction of the minors, you almost don't have any other choice if you have a fairly polished, advanced prep pitcher. And so they went with that, and he responded to the challenge gorgeously. And the breaking ball, really, he's got 2 breaking balls that are impressive. I think the changeup is going to have to come along a little, but it's got the right rudiments. He's going to have to clean up the fastball, and I think that's going to take a while. Like, I don't think Jackson Ferris is pitching in the big leagues in even 2025, maybe late in 2026. But yeah, if he can stay healthy, then I do think the ceiling's really high. I mean, it's why they wanted him, and it's proved out pretty nicely through 1 year. But the risk is just crazy on a guy who's 3 levels from the majors, and they were having him pitch 10 outs at a time once a week. I mean, we just don't have enough data on it yet. But I do like everything that he's gotten to show.
Yeah.
So you're not willing to say he won't be a Hall of Famer?
Oh, God.
No, although I'll just say this, and I don't want to hurt you. I'm not saying this to hurt you, Jeremy.
Hurt
I
him.
really believe it. I think I might like Drew Gray more than Jackson Ferris.
No, you've been wrong. Hey, Matt, you just said you've been wrong before.
Yeah, no, I know. I have been, and I'm sure I will be again. But Gray is, I think, the fastball's, it's just really flat at the top of the zone, and with great extension. And I like that because I think he can, he's already had Tommy John, and that obviously is this big risk thing. But I just think he could end up, if it struggles to all come together for him versus Ferris, they could move him to the bullpen and have him in the big leagues in a year, just shredding people with, not Josh Hader, that's too lofty, but that kind of just lefty, the ball gets on you in no time, and oh yeah, the breaking ball, it really starts on the same plane, and then when it gets off it, you're lost.
You're cooked. Okay, thanks for tempering Jeremy's expectations. Always need as much of that as possible. And Producer Theo reminds us in the chat that you believed once heavily in Oswaldo Arcia, Jeremy. But we won't spend any time.
I wasn't alone.
That's okay. We're all wrong a lot on the show. It's part of the fun. Matt, I want to come back to, so we alluded to Arizona Fall League stuff, right? And I felt like the Cubs sent by far the most interesting contingent of guys of the 3 teams that we cover here. And this is unfortunately an opportunity for Jeremy to be smug, which I'm sure he'll take advantage of, because his kind of pick to click, if you will, for the AFL from the Cubs contingent was James Triantos, who just absolutely tore it up, just mashed everything. And we know that's a like heavy, offensively favorable environment. But we also kind of talked about some similarities, right, in terms of Triantos with Eddie Julien, right, of a really strong AFL performance, a guy who doesn't necessarily have a really fixed defensive home, some intriguing offensive skills. Do you expect that AFL performance to carry over into 2024, or is Triantos more trade bait? Curious for your take on him.
Yeah, trade bait is an interesting, I think you can ask a lot of people who follow the Cubs system closely, and Triantos is a name they will spit out right away as someone that they could look to move. Not because anything he's doing is fake. I will say the feel for contact is awesome, and it's real, and I think he's going to be able to carry it up to the big leagues. And it's not weak contact per se, but I just think he's never going to produce even average power. And that's a separator from, Julien, you were sketching sort of a profile, right? A general concept. But Julien, a lot of power, more swing and miss issues. Triantos isn't going to have the swing and miss issues, but he really doesn't have, like, he's going to stay on the wrong side of average for power. And that's such a limiting factor in today's game. And I sort of wish it wasn't that way, but there is nothing you can do to change it. There's just nothing you can do. The players are all getting bigger. Players are all getting stronger. The players are all getting faster. Power is not going to stop being a prerequisite for a modern, above average ball player. That's, unless you're Luis Ariz, there's no other exception to the rule. And certainly not if you're James Triantos, who I agree is just, it's not that he'll never be useful defensively, but you're never going to want him at any one position defensively. He's going to move around and be Michael Young kind of versatile. He can play all over the infield because it's not like he's going to be good anywhere.
Wow.
I think, it's not, I don't mean to sound too down on him. It's just, there's a hard ceiling, a relatively low ceiling on a profile that's without even average power. And that's where he's stuck because, again, it doesn't come with a glove that lets you overlook any of the flaws on offense.
But the Cubs have been so good at having that type of player, haven't they? Like, isn't that Ben Zobrist? Isn't that, I mean, he was good defensively.
Right.
Ian Happ, maybe better with the bat. Like, that type of versatility just seems like it screams, yeah, Cubs will do this, and Counsell will do that. I feel like it's a kind of the perfect fit for him.
Yeah, I think, well, I also think some of it's roster fit, where James Triantos is plenty valuable if you look down the road a couple of years and you see even a platoon opening at second base, and then the rest of the time he plays third or he slides in at DH. But at least he can have some utility on the infield. I don't like Triantos's glove at third. I think it's probably a 45 glove there, just between the arm strength and the actions when he was put there. It hasn't always been pretty. His best position might be second base. The Cubs don't need a second baseman. They've got Nico Horner, and for the moment, they've got Christopher Morel, who is not a great defender, but his best position is second base. They just don't need what Triantos does do defensively. So then it becomes all about the bat. And the question is, okay, maybe he hits 300, but is it a totally empty 300? Like, is he going to hit 300 with a 380 on base percentage? Or a pitcher is going to be so unafraid of him because he's hitting 7 homers a year that it's 300 with a 350 OBP and a 400 slug. And you're wondering why this is useful when, again, he can't really play a position that you care about. I just think the fit is less than ideal.
Matt hates Trianos. I'll just write that down.
Yeah. No, I feel that. I
didn't feel in my heart how much I hated him, but the words do sound like I'm a hater.
Yeah. You hate him so much, I can't. My camera can't even focus on me anymore.
Jared, you've upset Jeremy. He's become blurry as a result of your Triantos hatred.
It's when I get angry, we get fuzzy. Okay, so this might segue into the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think of the Cubs prospects are the most likely to be traded, or which of the Cubs prospects are you most likely to be willing to part with, and why?
Yeah, I think it's probably starts with Triantos. I am very unlike Jed Hoyer, and I can't tell how much of this is because I've spent 10 plus years writing about baseball, and that's so different from actually running a baseball team.
That's the episode title right there. I'm so unlike Jed Hoyer. I love it. Keep going. Sorry.
But it's really, I don't know. I think there's an entertainment value to just keeping some turnover going that I place a value on just as a fan. Like, I don't want to wait and see on everybody and just let every developmental arc play out, which is more Jed Hoyer's speed. I would turn over probably a handful of guys. Triantos, I might be looking to trade, it might be Brown for me, just because, again, I think could be a really good closer, but pretty good chance if you try to keep him as a starter that it's going to get bumpy over the next year or so. And I might want to sell high on him. I might look at a guy like Brandon Birdsell, who had a really good first full year in pro ball, and cash in on that now. I'd be proactive in that way, and I don't think Hoyer is comfortable doing it. But I'd also be aiming higher in trades than Hoyer seems to aim. So I would need to shake loose a few more of my guys. All right. I might decide I don't see as big a difference between PCA and Alcantara as the industry does, and see if PCA unlocks just a top tier talent somewhere in the league for me. But I don't think that's even on Jed Hoyer's radar. So it doesn't really matter whether I would trade PCA or not.
But with having, I'm looking at MLB's top 30. 3 of their top 4 are outfielders, with ETAs of pretty much now. So doesn't that have to, I mean, you're a team that's contending or plans to contend right now. Don't you have to consider that depth of right now prospect ready with the guys that you have? I mean, it's not like they don't have any outfielders. They don't have a ton of outfielders, but they have players there already.
Yeah. No, and like I said, they extended Hap. There's 3 years now on his deal and 3 years left on Suzuki's. You've got both corner spots sewn up for the not just even the short term, kind of the medium term. And these guys, I mean, Alcantara's going to be ready early 2025 at the latest, unless he runs into more injury issues.
Mm-hmm.
I think again, my way of thinking would be it's time for me to, nobody's got me cornered. I can decide which one I want to move, and that lets me decide which markets I want to play in on the trade market. But I am going to be looking to move one of those guys so that I'm not left with more assets than I can use well, as I'm starting to see, or the league is starting to see, their warts put on display. I might have already moved one of them, to be honest with you. I might have been a lot more aggressive in a Juan Soto sweepstakes, although it seems like the Padres were prioritizing pitching. Maybe I'd have been more open to that than Hoyer was too. One problem that he has had is sort of getting cornered. He doesn't want to act until he feels like he's getting really good value out of a transaction. That's worked. They've made really good trades for Ben Brown, for Hayden Wesneski, for Daniel Palencia, without giving up a lot in the process. Or they got Alcantara, they got Alexander Canario, they got PCA by trading away those big names from their old core. He gets good value when he makes a move, but I think he misses too many opportunities to make moves that might be more value neutral, but leave him more flexibility and better options in the future. And instead, he does get cornered, and he is going to end up with Alcantara and PCA both on the big league roster, and they've somehow been wedged into a platoon because the corners are spoken for, and neither of them can hit same-handed pitching. And we just turned 2 top 50 prospects in the game, if you ask the right people, into sort of middling ball players that don't have a lot of trade value. Oops.
I like this version of Matt, who's kind of grumpy and jaded.
I just want to watch. I just want to sit next to Matt and watch a Cubs game. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. So Matt, I want to. We're coming up on the end of questions. We have some of the folks that listen to the show send in too that I want to get to, but I do want to make sure we give you an opportunity to kind of speak to the depth a little bit, because often the unintentional trap that we fall into, right, is we're going to focus on the guys near the top of the system, and there's so many interesting Cubs prospects up and down the system. So you can take this question wherever you want to go with it. Who are some under the radar guys that you would spotlight from lower in the system, right? And so if we think kind of like later teens on down, anyone you think is worth highlighting, and then any of those guys, I know you mentioned Gray already, anyone you think is getting ready to take a leap in 2024, or you're going to be kind of hyper focused on, and just curious for your thought process there.
Well, we've gotten dangerously close to the end here without any of us saying the name Jefferson Rojas. So even though he's not that far down the rankings, we got to talk a little bit about him. Spent his age 18 season in a really tough hitters environment and put up pretty interesting numbers. And when you watch the video, that's a heck of a swing for a guy who's 18 years old and right now is a shortstop. I think he might be a third baseman in the end, but Rojas is the guy I think that's a name you might hear a lot very soon. Guys who are in Double-A, they've got a couple of really interesting bats that can be easily overlooked because the Cubs are very good at the first stage of hitter development. They'll draft a guy in the 11th round, and he will rake up through Double-A, maybe even Triple-A, and then sort of stall out when he gets close to the majors. So that's left a lot of people jaded, like I apparently am. But BJ Murray Jr. and Hayden McGeary are legit. Those guys can actually hit, and it is going to continue to take good player development to get them over the hump into having value in a big league role, because Murray's playing third right now. I don't think he's a third baseman.
First baseman, maybe?
Yeah, probably. And McGeary is playing first base now, and I think he might just be a DH. But dude hammers the baseball. So those two jump out to me as, it's really easy for that kind of player to fly under the radar, because boy, do they have to clear a high bar with the one thing that they're really good at.
Yeah.
But I think they're actually pretty darn good at it and have done really interesting things against high levels of competition. Murray played really well in the WBC last year. So those are the names that leap out to me in my head. I think Gray is the other one, but we already talked about that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we want to finish up with a couple of listener questions here, and I like to take slight liberties with people's questions, so I'm going to tweak one of them a little bit so it's not too similar to something you just answered, right? So I'll do the first one, Jeremy, if you want to take the second. So for someone who doesn't pay any attention to the Cubs system, right? Who's a prospect you think they should be paying attention to? No requirements on where in the system or how high caliber of a prospect they might be, right? But more so asking from the lens of like, who would you pay attention to in 2024 as an indicator of how player development is going for the Cubs organization?
Love that. Okay. I think it's Michael Arias, who, because he's already sort of, this is one of those tricky things. We can start crediting teams for a developmental win before a player's even seen AA. That's what it feels like people would want to do with Arias. It was released by the Blue Jays because he couldn't hit as a shortstop. The Cubs sign him, and now there's a chance he's going to make it to the majors as a starting pitcher. Mm-hmm. I think he ends up getting moved to the bullpen, but it's a really live arm, a tricky slot, especially if he is working in relief. Righties are going to hate this dude, because if he does move to the pen, it's probably going to scrape triple digits now and then. It's a real nasty combination of breaking ball offerings. If they can, he thrived. Well, thrived might be too strong a word. He struggled with command, but really showed interesting stuff in high A last year. If he moves up to AA and it doesn't even have to be a leap. If he just cleans up his command a little bit, everything else is going to sing. And then he could finish the year in the major leagues. If that happens, then the Cubs have really cleared a hurdle in terms of their player development sort of infrastructure. And some of the things that we saw, they did really well in pitching development while Craig Breslow was running their pitching operation in the minors, are clearly holding up, even though Breslow has now moved on to Boston. If Arias and other dudes sort of like him stall out, then you know that, maybe Breslow was really instrumental and not so easily replaced, even though you hope that they put systems in place while he was there that make him theoretically replaceable.
Yeah, love that pick.
The next listener question's from Cody Schoenman, and he asks or says, Cole Franklin is an interesting prospect. Does he still have rotation upside, or should Cubs roll the dice and see if he could become an above average bullpen piece?
I think I would move him to the bullpen, just because I always think in terms of the ticking roster clock, right? Franklin's at that stage where if you want to spend the time to develop into a starter, and if he has the good luck, the good health, and the good makeup to actually get from where he is now to viable major league starter, even if he has all those things, that process is still going to take like 2 years, because he's just not that close to doing it. But there's such a compression of what you really need if he moves into the pen. I mean, we've seen guys just take a leap. Yohan Duran's not even an extreme enough example. Several years ago, the Mariners were casting about for late inning bullpen options. And so one day they just took a starter who was doing real well in high A, converted him to the bullpen, and a month later, Edwin Diaz was closing games for them. That kind of thing can happen. The Cubs just did it last year to a less extreme and successful degree with Daniel Palencia. I think it just makes sense because, again, the clock is ticking. You're going to run out of team control. You're going to run out of option years, all of it. Get him into the bullpen, see what you can do with him. And then if it doesn't work, you move on. You say, it's time for a change of scenery. We tried this, we took our best shot and it still didn't work. And then if it does, you have a quick payoff. I think trying to keep him in the rotation at this point is just more effort and resources put in the wrong place than it's worth.
And I have to ask my own question because I don't believe this name has come up at all. And watching the first round of the 2023 draft, Jamie just shakes his head at me.
But now
well, of course you know where I'm going because we've talked about this. My favorite, or one of my favorite picks of the first round, was the Cubs drafting Matt Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
And then watching what he did as a pro. And now we haven't talked about him. He's a top 100 prospect right now. How do you view Matt Shaw? I'm not going to say too much about how I feel about him because I think he'll just, pee in my cereal. But tell me your opinion on Matt Shaw.
Yeah, I think he's got a really high floor and an interesting ceiling. It's sort of what if James Triantos had better power? He's not gonna knock 30 homers or anything, but he can punish a mistake. And I think what we saw from him in his pro debut affirmed everything on his scouting report. Just it's really impressive, just bat to ball ability, and not just feeling for contact, but barrel to ball fast and hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I don't think he's a shortstop. I don't want to completely rule it out, but I don't think that's in his future. There are a lot of people who are excited about him on Cubs Twitter who think by the end of 2024, he could be the Cubs third baseman. Maybe. I probably, again, would like him best at second base out of any position, but I do think he could work at third. He's just a little more physical, a little, better tools maybe than Triantos. And also everything he did in his pro debut offensively, it was because he didn't encounter good enough competition to show him where his holes really are. He's going to have to modulate his approach. He's got an approach that absolutely works against every pitcher he's ever seen, but won't consistently work in the majors. He's going to have to make a couple of mechanical adjustments. There's just a length that doesn't come from like a bad load or bad habits or anything, but just it's how he maximizes his power, and he can afford to do it because he sees and just can beat every pitcher he's ever seen to their spot. He's going to have to make some major adjustments, but that I think he's also shown the ability to make adjustments at a level where I think he's going to do it. And I think he's really going to be a hitter, and a hitter soon. He might not be a perfect fit for the Cubs roster, but it's not like Triantos in that I think, you can have a square peg in a round hole, but sometimes you can just wedge that in. Sometimes it works anyway. And I think that's Shaw at this moment. He'll find ways to contribute in the short term, and then medium term, he might be an answer in any number of ways, even if ultimately he moves to left field. I think he's a good enough athlete to be average plus out there with a bat to carry it.
Do you think he debuts this year?
I think it's too early in the offseason for me to answer that, because while Cubs Twitter is freaking out and they're all convinced that the Cubs silence so far means they're never going to do anything again, I think the Cubs are going to make some moves. And I think the roster is going to look quite different on opening day than it does right now. And that might answer some questions about whether or not Matt Shaw, if they spend all the resources they're going to spend this winter fortifying their pitching staff, which I don't think would be a terrible idea, then that really does leave an opening that he can walk into easily at third base. And then I think we would. But if they end up signing a Matt Chapman, or I don't know. There are lots of permutations, lots of different ways they could add someone who sort of pushes things into Shaw's way for 2024 and gives him more time to make, again, what I think are still relatively significant adjustments. I don't think it would be a bad thing if they don't see him until 2025 either.
Fair.
For sure. No, I'm glad you asked about Shaw, Jeremy. I thought you were going to ask about Jackson Wiggins. So that's one we can save for another time.
Yeah, there's plenty of time on the draft class.
Okay, well, we're gonna call it a day. Wanna finish with some thank yous and some reminders of ways you can support the show. Thanks as always to producer Theo for keeping everything running smoothly behind the scenes. Matt, big thank you to you for your time. We appreciate it. Know you're in a new role with plenty to juggle. And I always learn something from you when we have a conversation about baseball. So thanks so much for your insights. We will be back not next week because we're going to take a week off for the holidays, but we'll be back the week of January 3rd. Hopefully, we're going to be digging into the Brewers system, but that is dependent on a guest. So we'll call it TBD for now. And as always, if you want to support the show, you can do so via downloads, shares, retweets, positive reviews of your podcast platform of choice. And thanks for a great 2023. We'll see you guys in the new year.